thanks everyone for joining. I'll be presenting some of SRM's internal training materials on prompt engineering. Prompt engineering is the art and science of getting the most from large language model-based tools like ChatGPT by crafting great prompts. But before I get into that too far, I want to refresh on why this is important. So AI is a technology that's proving to be as important as the steam engine or the printing press, and it's driving a revolution in how work is done. AI is really the primary development that companies and governments are betting on, and it's already becoming embedded in how we work, from standalone third-party tools to solutions as ubiquitous as Adobe Reader. And therefore, it's going to be critical for everyone to understand how to maximize the power of these tools. The way that I like to talk about it is that AI skills are the Excel skills of the current era. That's how embedded into our work AI is rapidly becoming. And just to provide a couple proof points here, NVIDIA, the primary supplier of AI chips, is responsible for more than 36% of the S&P 500's total market cap gained in 2024. Some of you may have noticed that it was briefly the most valuable company in the world. And that's because big companies, governments, really everyone who's looking to get into AI and placing their bets there is needing to buy chips from NVIDIA, and that's driven their stock price tremendously high. So this is something that's real, it's happening, and has a tremendous amount of investment coming into it. And there's broad agreement amongst executives across many industries and many different surveys that I've seen that generative AI is a disruptive technology. And we see this today even with companies like Klarna leveraging AI to do the work of hundreds of contact center representatives, boosting their profits, in Klarna's case, by, I think, something like 40 million annually. So AI isn't just a future concept, it's delivering results now. And we're seeing that not just at the really big institutions, but also amongst many smaller community FIs. So getting into prompt engineering, the way that I like to think about AI assistants is as superhumanly fast and knowledgeable interns or new hires. It's a bit like working with a new hire who has a high school to undergrad level of understanding of every knowledge domain that exists, practically, but doesn't have much depth of knowledge or experience in most of those domains. Think broad, but mostly shallow. So AI assistants can do amazing things, but they need clear directions. The better you understand your AI's strengths and weaknesses, the better you can craft prompts that will get the most out of them. So what is a prompt? Prompts are just what we input into a model to try to get a particular output, and they're the primary way that we communicate with our AI tools. Anyone who's used large language models much knows that they aren't mind readers, typically, and that failing to produce the appropriate context or direction can yield unusable results. And I say usually there because I have had an experience where I put data in that I wanted categorized, and I actually forgot to provide a prompt, but the AI managed to guess correctly what I wanted anyway. So sometimes when it's kind of close enough to the original purpose of large language models to auto-complete what you want, you can get away without a prompt, but that's very, very rare. And you'll basically always get better results with a good prompt. And just like a recipe, a good prompt with the right context leads to consistently superior results. Vague instructions can yield something excellent or something that is totally off base. In general, the more niche and industry specific your needs are, the less likely a basic prompt is to deliver good outcomes. A well-crafted prompt ensures that your AI assistant understands exactly what you need. And getting good content depends on your ability to guide the AI. So I've used prompts that were as long as 2 pages, or many more if you include the input data that I've provided alongside the prompt. So I'll briefly review the design considerations on this page and then go over an example prompt. And we'll get into some of these tips more deeply later on. So context is what it needs to know about your use case. It's your industry situation. It's what the roles are of the individuals involved for like an email communication. It's just giving it enough information about what you're trying to do and what the context is to have some sense of what it should be outputting. Expert personas can help to steer the large language model toward the desired type of content, style and tone of output, and overall reference frame. So this is something like telling the model to act as an expert AI researcher or as a business strategist. You can even tell the AI to act as a famous individual like Einstein or Michael Porter of Porter's Five Forces and other business strategy. Although, if the individual you pick isn't famous enough to be prominent in the training data, the model may guess their expertise incorrectly. So tends to work better to use more famous people. The verbs you use matter. For example, telling an AI to review can yield a substantially different output versus telling it to proofread. Large language models tend to default to paragraph structure responses when not otherwise prompted. So if you want a particular length or bullets or a table, then you need to define that in the prompt. The task is what you want it to do, and specificity here can really help a lot as far as getting what you want. Purpose, this is what you're looking to achieve more broadly. So whether it's persuade, entertain, inform, sell, this is helps to steer towards what the ultimate purpose of the content is. Tone, so you want to match your tone to the context, be it professional, technical, informal. This is also where you would steer the large language model if you wanted to reduce how much it sounds like an AI. So people are getting better at spotting AI-generated writing, so distinctiveness will be increasingly important in the future. And you can guide large language models to avoid specific words or phrases in addition to dictating the overall tone. With audience, similar to tone, it helps to narrow the context for the large language model and steer the content that it makes. References. So if you want the large language model to confine its sources to specific data that you provide, you need to include that data and the instruction to do so in the prompt. Also, if you want the large language model to cite sources for its information, specify that as well. Now, there is variance between different AI tools, and this does carry some risk of hallucination to tell it to cite sources for most of them. In general, most AI assistants will be better at citing general sources for broad ideas than specific articles and websites. So as the guidance is for basically all generative outputs, always double check them. Keywords, so any jargon or acronyms which need to be defined, or cases where maybe your company uses the same term in a different way than the industry standard, absolutely detail those out to minimize confusion, because you can end up with pretty incorrect outcomes. Examples, more on this later, but examples can help a lot in demonstrating what exactly you want from the large language model, both for format and for content. And then finally, notes. If there's any additional context you need to provide, like if there is an approach or a concept that you want the large language model to specifically avoid, that could go here. So quick pause for any questions on this before I get into the example prompt. All right, I don't see anything in chat, so I'll keep driving. So I won't read this entire prompt, but you can see on the slide how the different elements I went over fit together for a real use case. This prompt produced the starting point for creating a PowerPoint presentation. It didn't get all the way there, it didn't provide a final product, but it still saved hours and hours of work in the ideation and design and components of the presentation. And one interesting thing about these AI tools is that they can even output VBA code, which means that you can actually produce a PowerPoint deck as code effectively, as a starting point for you to edit from. Now, my experience doing that kind of thing in my sort of limited testing is that it tends to be better to stick with specialized presentation generation tools. There's a number of vendors who have kind of hooked up LLMs to be the brains and make the outlines, design, and content, but used a variety of pre-generated formats that they choose between to help to stitch together a better presentation. And I tend to find those work better than trying to generate a presentation fully from scratch out of a large language model, but it is a capability that's there if you really want something to start from. So getting into a few more of the details of different ways of prompting. Clarity is important. If you don't detail out jargon and acronyms or provide enough context for the large language model to guess, you'll often get responses that are some amount of off base. So in the example here, I told it to design an org structure for a CRO, right? And in our typical context, CRO is kind of doubly ambiguous because it could be a chief revenue officer, it could be a chief risk officer. Um, and you can see here actually the AI, because I didn't specify at all, picked the wrong industry entirely and the wrong level of org structure. So it picked a clinical research organization. So not finance at all, and also at the level of a whole organization, not a single directorate. And so the better prompt here is to design an org structure for a chief risk officer at a community bank with assets of 2 billion, right? So it doesn't even have to be a lot more. It's just making the context clearer that it's a community bank. And then because it has bearing on what the appropriate structure would be, I also included the asset size to help bound it and make it a closer in output to what I'm likely to want. And something to remember about vagueness is that large language models will only rarely ask clarifying questions that they really ought to, even when you prompt them to ask you questions. They're much more tuned to just take a shot at answering whatever your question is. So narrowing the uncertainty as much as possible will help you to get the results you want the first time instead of needing to go through rounds of clarification. So the rule of thumb here is don't be vague, and remember that AI is not a mind reader. There are a couple of techniques that I want to highlight here that can often make a huge difference for certain types of tasks, especially things like data processing. And both of these look very similar to how you would work with a talented intern or a new hire that you are coaching to produce a deliverable for you. So providing examples within the prompt can tremendously improve your outputs. This includes both the format, like providing a template or a table that you want the large language model to populate for its response, and for the content, like giving a sample of a correct output for a given input demonstrates what you want to be done. And input-output pairs are essentially how model fine-tuning is done in terms of the training of a large language model. And interestingly, this can work even when the exact task to be completed isn't fully defined. In the example I have here, it's very cut and dried. Ensure that every row has a period at the end. But I've also used this for fuzzier classification tasks, like feeding an Excel export of my Outlook calendar into a large language model to categorize my meetings and appointments into internal and external meetings, time allocations for specific projects, admin time, research time, so on and so forth. Um, and for that task, there isn't a set of if-then statements which will perfectly complete that categorization task, because not everything in my calendar is consistently named or labeled. But by giving examples, I can get a much higher accuracy out of the large language model for how I would have categorized it than by attempting to exhaustively detail my categorization rules. The next tip here is to iterate. So this may seem obvious, but you shouldn't expect the AI to always get it perfectly on the first attempt. Just like with an intern, you can provide feedback, request edits, try out different tones and lengths. And the benefit with AI is that the turn time to get the next iteration back is orders of magnitudes faster than any intern I've ever worked with. So you can iterate really quite quickly. There's also some weird cases I've noticed, like around response length, where sometimes the AI won't appropriately calibrate the length based on the initial prompt, but it can get there with iteration. For some contexts, like email responses, I have a habit of telling the AI to write what I want, then telling it to make it more concise in a follow-up prompt, and then telling it to split the difference between the original length and the shorter length. And that process usually gets it very close to the level of detail I want, more consistently than just telling it up front. So there are some interesting cases like that that you may find as you use large language models more, where iteration can take the place of upfront prompt engineering. But in general, you'll get the best results by doing both. Another thing is that the verbs you use are important. The difference between summarize and analyze, or reword and rewrite, or develop and craft can be meaningful in steering the AI's output and quality. Some examples here of verbs that you could use and prompts to go with them, like analyze the main themes in the 2009 Credit Card Act. Summarize the key points of the proposed changes in bank liquidity regulation. Compare and contrast the economic policies of the US and China. predict potential outcomes of increasing interest rates, classify the following retail transactions based on their MCC code. So a good verb choice is critical to getting the output that you want. As far as the prompt length, typically the shorter the prompt, the more general a response you'll get out of the model. And the longer the prompt, the more specific a response you'll get. And this goes back to what I said about how niche your intended use is. So general prompts will tend to get a regression to the mean, sort of, for the AI's training data. So if you provide a really short, non-specific prompt, you'll tend to get something that's very archetypical for whatever you're asking for, although often high quality because it has a lot of training data for the sort of standard answer to whatever you're asking. More specific prompts will help to steer the AI towards your particular niche and need. Tone is also important. So the tone of your prompt should directly connect to the intended purpose of the output. A serious research paper needs a different tone than a lighthearted social media post. You can even feed in samples of your own past writing or that of some writer you admire. Legal issues kind of pending. Don't steal people's writing, but they're places where things are public domain. And you can ask the AI to match that tone. Although in my experience, not all AI tools do this equally well. If you're looking to really emulate a tone or have something that's a little bit more dynamic to tone, I would probably recommend Claude over ChatGPT. ChatGPT is occasionally accused of overfitting, which just means that it has a tremendous amount of tuning towards a particular tone and way of answering, and it's harder in your prompting to pull it away and get it to be different and dynamic. Also audience, right? Think about who's going to be consuming the output. Are you writing for a group of experts or targeting a more broad general audience? And knowing that helps to tailor the tone and complexity of your prompt. For example, you can ask the AI to give you a response to provide 4 different levels of response in terms of its detail and information at a grade school level, at a high school level, at a college level, and at a post-grad level. And I find that can be really helpful for understanding concepts at different sort of levels of granularity and seeing where simpler explanations are generalizing more complex and nuanced ideas. An interesting technique that doesn't get as much press because it's unclear sort of how well it works is promising a reward or threatening a punishment as part of the prompt for the AI may produce higher quality outputs than simply making the request. Now, like I said, it's not clear if this effect is real or if it's just confirmation bias from the people who've reported it, but it's something else that you can try if you're struggling to get the output that you want. And if it does work, the reasons for it aren't fully understood. One hypothesis is that the model has some concept of the relationship between incentives and work quality and comprehensiveness, in the same way that you might answer a question differently if told to give a $1 answer versus a $100 answer. Another is that in its training data or tuning, it may see higher quality answers following promises of incentives, so is more likely to predict tokens that form a higher quality output when prompted using incentives. Now, the research on this is largely inconclusive, and it's likely that if there is an effect, it's not the same across different types of tasks, so your mileage may vary. But again, if you're struggling to get an output and it seems like the model just really needs to put in more effort or more detail, this is something that you can try. Getting into sort of an expert level of configuration, for anyone who's purchased access to the ChatGPT API, there are a few lesser known ways to control and customize the output. The most important and the one I'll talk about most is temperature, which helps you to control the balance between accuracy and creativity of the outputs. Lower temperature is more precise but less creative, tends to be more suitable for tasks like coding or information lookup tasks where you really want it to be accurate to what's true and what's most probable within the training data. And higher temperatures tend to be better for creative and less precise tasks like creative writing or producing eminence or things that you need more creativity and dynamism in. Other settings exist to help you tune length, repetitiveness, and some of the other dimensions of creativity and output parameters. And if you're looking to, and an easier way to adjust temperature rather than going through the API is to use an AI tool that actually gives you an option of selecting your output type. There's a variety of different front ends for all of these models, but for example, Copilot, what used to be Bing Chat, offers three different output types, more creative, more precise, and balanced. And so that's really just adjusting temperature and tweaking a couple of these other parameters. So in summary, clarity and specificity are how you get to excellent, effective prompts. Um, and hopefully everyone has found this helpful and is able to do better in their prompting in the future. So thanks for listening. Relatively short session, but here for any questions and discussion.
Connor, I'm sure there'll be some questions. I certainly will pose a few if others don't chime in first. So one of the questions I have, could you maybe talk a little bit about the importance of checking references? I know some of these AIs are getting better, especially like Claude 3.5, but I've found that sometimes they'll give you references, but sometimes those references aren't entirely accurate, or they'll give you references, but when you actually look in the references to see maybe a number you've cited, the number isn't the same as within the reference. So can you maybe talk a little bit about the importance of kind of double checking the work and maybe using it as a foundation to get you started on some research paper or something like that, but at the end of the day, making sure that what you're outputting is accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you said it well, where even models that are built specifically to give you references, like Gemini and Perplexity, right, is sort of the startup challenger to Google. Um, it'll give you links that you can look at, but it is really important to actually check those links, because what it's giving you in the output is a blend of its training data. So it's sort of like general knowledge about the world and whatever it's been tuned to say, and what it's found in that information search. And so it's doing this sort of synthesis of both of those data sources, and in most cases, and that means that it may not be precisely accurate, or Larry, like you said, it may give a source for something that doesn't actually support the bullet that it's on. So it is really important to click through those links and peruse them to see what it's really saying, especially for domains that are more niche or where there's kind of less online. It's not necessarily more trustworthy to use an AI tool to Google for you effectively, right? So you still need to check through all of those sources, make sure that they're correct and that they actually support your argument for anything that has any level of criticality to it, or that requires accuracy. And that's also why for any productionized use cases, it's really important to do a lot of tuning to make sure that you aren't getting hallucinations and that your error rate is below the human standard.
Connor, you mentioned Perplexity. For those that aren't familiar with it, I wasn't super familiar with it, but I've started using it quite a bit from a search tool standpoint. Maybe you can just talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to drop in the link. There's a great interview. Lex Freeman did an interview with the CEO of Perplexity, and how that it's kind of as I understand it, it's almost like a search tool that's based on AI, if that's reasonably accurate.
Yeah, so I've just pulled up Perplexity, and you can ask it about current news articles. You can ask it more open-ended questions, or like research questions. If you're looking for like how to take apart a specific model of car or fix an issue, it's likely to give you pretty decent instructions like you would get from a large language model, but um, it'll also give you references where in links where it at least pulled some of that information from. Um, I don't know, Larry, what model and year of car do you have?
What's that?
What model and year of car do you drive?
Oh, gosh, it's a 2017 Audi S7, I think is what it was.
All right, let's see what this comes up with.
And that'll be a good one because there's not a lot of people with that specific car.
Okay, so it has a bunch of relatively generic advice on finding what the problems are, but it also does give some specific things. Like it says the PCV system can be problematic in these specific models, and there's an extended warranty you can check for, and it provides references. So this comes from
Huh.
apparently pretty in the Audi forums. But in order to validate that that is in fact true and not just something that one person said, you'll need to skim through this, right? So, I would say there's a quite a temptation to be over reliant on it to be correct. But it is a very helpful tool for rapid research. And I would give the edge to it over Gemini for ease of use at the very least, because Gemini will give you sources, but you have to hit another button for it to do the process to check. Probably as a cost saving measure from Google, if I had to guess. But yeah, Perplexity is one of the ones that really has Google nervous. And just like any LLM, you can ask follow-up questions. It even suggests some follow-up questions for you to ask. You can pull out all the different sources. And it is still at the end of the day a model. So if you want to ask it to code you to produce the software code for the game Snake, it can take a shot at it. Um, so it's still a general assistant. It's just very much geared towards knowledge search.
Another question for you, and maybe you can talk about some of bank and credit union applications. And I know we've seen, or at least there's been some use of generative AI for kind of chatbots. So I think you mentioned
Klarna,
is it
yeah.
yeah, Klarna buy now, pay later. And now we've got these new models, the Chat 4.0, Gemini, like they moved into this multimodal capabilities where, previously they really only could take input of text. Now they can take input of voice and vision. So it's, in my mind, it's kind of like a much more capable Siri or Alexa, but a lot more conversational with very low latency. I think that's probably the future of a potential future of member customer service. But maybe what's your thoughts on some of the multimodal capabilities on the impact of banking, credit union, member customer service?
As far as multimodal, it's more about expanding the domains that they can help in. And if you're looking to sort of fully replace a human agent, then that's where we can imagine a future kind of like Glia's offering, where you have co-browsing, where the AI is able to look at the same screen that a customer's looking at and tell them what to click on or how to navigate, based on using that machine vision. And then in terms of like audio multimodal, that's mainly a processing speed and to an extent naturalistic interaction question. So I don't think that'll look that different from the UX side of things, except just smoothing it out, for being able to process audio, for being able to input and output audio natively. Um, but I think the vision will be more important, for being able to navigate websites and potentially to parse documents that people upload straight off. Now, given it all comes down to reliability, right? So the error rates will be really important here in terms of how often the AI models are able to correctly understand or correctly extract the information from the document without hallucinating or causing issues. Because if someone's trying to send an image of a check, for example, and saying, "Hey, why doesn't this scan through the usual system for remote deposit?" The AI needs to be able to not just read the check, but also understand things like what does a crumpled check look like, and what are the potential reasons why a remote deposit can fail, and connect that to this individual instance, which is like we can imagine as well within the capabilities of AI today. But it's the reliability of it that will be kind of the key make or break question, as well as the amount of data that's required to tune that and how extensible it is across different FIs. right? So if every individual FI has to train it for their particular checks or their particular images, documents, processes, that'll really chill adoption and increase cost and put kind of a lower bound on the size of institution that can use that technology, versus if you just have a vendor who can basically do it for everyone pretty easily once they've tuned their global model.
Well, one of our colleagues, Dean Nolan, had shared an infographic from a webinar presentation he saw recently, and it talked about the efficiencies that banks and credit unions would be experiencing, kind of in different categories. And recently I posted on LinkedIn an article that I'd found from Bank of America, and Bank of America in their recent earnings report said that they were spending $4 billion, but that's with a B, this year on AI and in other advanced technologies. And you think about that impact, and I think there's another study that estimated about $1 trillion of operating expense impact, to like reducing operating expense impact for financial services, I think by year 2030. You kind of combine all that and you see how important this generative AI could be, for all industries and not just financial services. I mean, case in point, for anyone who follows the market, a lot of the AI chips were down considerably yesterday and day before. And what a lot of that had to do with was, I think the Biden administration is suggesting maybe putting some sanctions on, or really pushing some of these AI chip companies to make sure they're not sharing technologies with some of our competitors. And I think Trump last night came out and said similar, but politicians certainly recognize this as a real competitive advantage for the U.S. And I think that speaks volumes to how these things could be used in any industry, and where that ultimately may give us real advantages from a cost standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is an interesting sort of environment because everyone is trying to catch up on chip production right now. Everyone is trying to make their own chip fabrication, get the right expertise. Of course, NVIDIA's employees are some of the most absurdly highly paid folks in the world due to what's happened with the stock. Anyone who had stock options probably doesn't need to work anymore. So getting that highly specialized chip manufacturing and design expertise is not an easy thing. But governments the world over are throwing money at it because they recognize that AI chips are a strategic, potentially militarily strategic asset and investment. And so that's part of why NVIDIA stock has rocketed so high, because in the short term they're buying from NVIDIA, but everyone's trying to build their own capacity, and that also means that the raw materials extraction is ramping up, but there will be an open question of like if we have enough to meet demand there, and all the different parts of the supply chain that need to expand, and of course the power grid demands, right, from building all these massive data centers.
I was surprised how vertical the integration is of all of these different companies, right? It's like Taiwan Semiconductor is supplied by like a Dutch company, ASML, which then supply Taiwan Semiconductor makes like the silicon wafers that supplies it for NVIDIA. Like it's literally, if you hit any one of those, like there's about 4 companies that are in that supply chain, you can kind of lock down the whole industry. And I think that's what the market was worried about today. But I think it's a bit of a oversold, or a little bit of a sell-off, but that's neither here nor there. I want to pause and see, there's got to be other questions that folks have. This was really helpful, Connor. And of course, you and I can chat about this all day, as we often do, but let's see if anyone else has questions or comments. Well, you must have done a great job, because there's not a lot of questions.
Yeah. Yeah, so everyone confident in their prompting expertise, knows how to get what they need out of AI solutions. I will add an addendum that I think is not discussed enough, which is, of course, like these tools have limitations in like how well they can do. It's I would say it's a rare task mainly because I don't have that many tasks that are not that sensitive or important, kind of how good the ultimate output is. But even with perfect prompting, it's not as though AI can do absolutely anything. And there comes a point in prompting where you're spending more effort building it than you save time in the completion of it, which is part of why like prompt engineering is much more important for any sort of scaled use case where you're building a call to an AI as part of an application or part of a ongoing automation process, because that's where it really pays off to do all that upfront work. But there are just use cases where you can't get the AI more than like 70% there without basically writing it yourself. And so like there's some judiciousness in terms of doing it. Just because you can't get what you want doesn't necessarily mean you're bad at prompting. I don't want to present the assumption that you can do anything with AI if you're good enough at prompting, but you can get a lot more done a lot faster if you're good at prompting. And so it's one of those things that as we all use these tools more and more in our daily lives, being 50% better at it, like 50% of the time you get what you want the first time instead of needing another go at it, especially if we end up with smarter and more expensive AI models where like it really starts to matter how many tokens you use, then being good and efficient with your prompting will make a outsized difference for the rest of your career.
So Connor, for those folks that don't know yet, what do you do with AI for SRM, and what does SRM do for the clients of SRM around AI?
Sure. It's funny, we've hit all three of the decks that I happen to have up, so it's sort of perfect. But I'm SRM's director of AI and intelligent automation. I help our clients kind of get their arms around AI, go from crawl to run with new and emerging technologies, and especially AI. Um, and so that's really the thrust of SRM services here, which is to help institutions understand, like, here's what you need to know, like, here's how you can control the risks and safe your institutions so that you aren't leaking data out into the world from employee usage of large language models. And then from there, here's how you can foster adoption to get efficiency gains from using these tools across all your various operations and things that employees are doing. Here's how you can manage vendor risk by, as I mentioned, vendors the world over are bolting on generative AI to their offerings, everyone from ServiceNow to Adobe to Alteryx to NewGen. There's just a lot of Gen AI bolt-on, and all of that data is potentially at risk of going out to OpenAI. So it's a good time for everyone to be reviewing their vendor agreements to see what they say about data and making sure that vendors are abiding by them, because there are incentives to use that data to train their own models. We also help with opportunity assessment. So if there's a sense of we have a lot of different options and a lot of different kinds of automation we could invest in, be it RPA, traditional conversational AI, generative AI, we can help to kind of scope and produce business cases for those different automations, make a backlog to work against, to produce value with AI. And then for institutions that are looking to implement an internal assistant that's safe for their proprietary data, which is usually the next step after getting a good policy in place. So oftentimes the maturity path and journey looks like getting a policy in place to make sure that employees aren't leaking data, and then launching an internal assistant that they can use with that proprietary data for whatever use cases they have that doesn't risk any of it leaking. It's sort of like blocking off if you block off access to things like ChatGPT without providing an alternative, that will tend to just fuel circumvention. It's very easy to find and access AI tools. There's dozens of them. If you haven't blocked at least 10 domains, they're very easy circumvention people can do. And in general, you want to facilitate the people who are already using AI to use it to do their jobs better, right? Those people are the innovators, so you don't want to stifle them. You want to just facilitate them, but in a way that's safe. So for companies that are looking to do that, we offer implementation support to stand up an AI assistant that's safe. And then because the space is moving so fast, both in terms of the technological capabilities and regulation, we do kind of ongoing compliance monitoring and updates to policy and strategy. So we can act as kind of the horizon scanning arm that really no one has time to do because it's a full-time job to keep on top of AI. So we can kind of be that adjunct to help you keep everything up to date and so that you know what's coming down the pipe. Um, so that's our core services around AI. Happy to talk more about any of these or like the sort of path that organizations take to more mature AI capabilities. Um, but that's an overview of our services.
Connor, I dropped the link for SRM's AI services in the chat. Get Connor, maybe tell if you can how did you get into AI? What got you interested? How long have you been in this field? Like because we've all heard about AI from a generational AI standpoint the last maybe what year and a half, but AI has been around for a lot longer. What's your experience with that, and how did you get interested?
Sure. It was sometime around when I was entering college, and just sort of taking a look at the different technologies that had potential for massive societal improvement and disruption, and thinking about which one I wanted to pursue. So that was things like biotech, nanotech, and AI, in terms of things that have offered some transformative potential. There's always something being pitched from like pop sci journals about something being on the horizon, but it's unclear kind of how real any of them are. So that was really when it first caught my eye as just one of the technologies that offers some level of opportunity to do an end run around a lot of the problems that we face as a society. And that led me to kind of chase AI throughout my consulting career at Deloitte, and spent a long stint in RPA because that was sort of where the appetite was. And the history of AI, like you said, it's quite long. It goes back to debatably like 1940s, more commonly cited like 1960s. Um, and it's always undergone kind of summers and winters of investment in terms of what people are expecting AI to be able to achieve. Famously, there's an example of one of the early professors and research scientists in AI giving the problem of machine vision, so how do computers see things and interpret objects like humans do, to one of his grad students to solve over the summer. So even professionals in the field have a very long track record of being bad at estimating how big the problems truly are. So we've been through a number of different kind of paradigms in AI, from symbolic systems, which is kind of like embedding concepts and hard coding in what a cat is into the AI as like the early approaches, and then with the power of computers and with more and more data available, that kind of gave way to the big data approach in like the 2000s, 2008 or so, where we started getting a ton of analytics and predictive analytics cases where you're just using a lot of data to train a deep neural network. Instead of explicitly telling it anything, you just give it enough pictures of cats that are labeled as cats, and eventually it learns what a cat is, or learns what set of pixels correspond to a cat, or something else that you might not want it to learn, depending how well you did the training. Um, and so that was kind of reaching the end of its hype arc, right as we were getting innovation around large language models, which are kind of an extension of the big data approach, because the core, it's still a deep neural network. It's still not a symbolic system, but it is trained with data, but it's using kind of new training algorithms and approaches, to be able to do what it does as far as generating content. And I won't get really deep into the hows of generative AI because it goes quite deep. But that's kind of our current paradigm, and no one really knows like how, like, is this the last summer before AI is just a continuous facet of life that always has a massive pace of progress, or is it we're going to have another fall after this hype cycle? It's hard to say, right? The default assumption is always that we'll reach the end of this hype cycle, But with the amount of investment that's pouring into it, to your point, Larry, right? Individual companies spending billions a year, and not just the specialist AI companies spending billions a year, but all of the tech giants practically and governments to boot. We may well hit the next algorithmic paradigm and advancement before this hype wave dies off. No one quite knows. Even the people who are closest to this in OpenAI, I think, can't give you a truly accurate estimate of what's going to happen. But that's kind of the historical framework for all this that I use to think about it.
That was awesome background. Another question. I heard something, and this is fairly new, so maybe you can talk to, maybe you can't. But OpenAI apparently now has a new code name for their reasoning model. It used to be called QStar. I think it's Strawberry now. Have you heard of that? Any insights into what might be going on there?
I mean, I saw when there was the mention of QStar, and it was almost pure speculation. Like there was basically nothing hard publicly available. There's just some mention of it, and people were, uh, you know, doing what the internet does around wild speculation of secret projects. I haven't seen the rename to Strawberry, but I don't know. I mean, OpenAI, the next big thing is GPT-5 more than likely. And the fact that they have been putting out these smaller models like 4.0, and then recently there's a 4.0 mini they put out that will replace 3.5. I think that announcement was just yesterday or today. But that's basically like a tiny, fast, cheap model that's more suited to edge computing use cases. So like the paths that they're taking for innovation suggests to me that like whatever that big project is, it's not that close to the horizon. And either it's something small and not that important that'll come out in the interim, or it's something that's further out past GPT-5. So I think there will probably be more imminent things that we end up worrying about.
Connor, look, we got a couple more minutes left. Where can people go to find more information about how to prompt? Is that something that we would offer? Is that something that they can find on the internet? How did you learn most of your prompting skills?
I mean, really, a lot of it was just working with AI as much as I do, and then understanding some of the underpinnings of it, and then just reading content here and there because I'm so steeped in it, which obviously is not what everyone wants to do. It's not the most efficient learning path, but um, I'm trying to remember if they have a good course on prompt engineering, but the LangChain group with Andrew Ng, uh, they have a lot of really good educational content around AI. And there's like, I mean, even I think Google has released some guidance on prompt engineering and on like the workings of large language model. There's a lot out there that's just available for free. Most of it is pretty good that I've seen. And certainly if you're looking for, and that's great if people are able to go out and do kind of self-directed learning. We SRM, being involved with a lot of FIs, recognize that's not always easy to accomplish. Sometimes you need to really sit people down in a room with someone at the head lecturing on something. And so if you're interested in SRM, doing education for your board or for your executives, either on prompt engineering or on things like AI safety, what is AI, just aligning in general on all of the core facets of the technology so that they can make good decisions going forward. Those are things that we offer. And feel free to visit our website, which Larry so helpfully linked earlier, to get more information on that.
Connor, this has been great. Really appreciate you leading this tech talk. We'll open it up one more time, see if there are any last minute comments or questions, and if not, we can wrap it up.
Hey, Connor, I was going to ask one quick question. Going back to, those internal AI assistants, that model, I would assume that there's still a kind of a gateway out to, the broader large language models for content and, just
Yeah.
information like that. But I'm guessing when you take that approach, you're really talking about, eliminating, someone from uploading a document or something into AI tool, right? Your proprietary information. Is that kind of the thought around that?
The policy is usually, preventing people from uploading any confidential documents or pasting in an email that has like customer or vendor names, or having a large language model like analyze your budget, and therefore now your budget's potentially in the training data. With any freely available tools for an internal implementation. The way you can think about security for it is it's kind of like cloud. So if you're already storing confidential information in Microsoft Azure cloud, or have cloud hosted applications, like that data is going out somewhere. It's just you have adequate kind of encryption mechanisms for your level of risk tolerance to do that. And that's sort of the industry standard. So it's analogous to that, where the data is still going out, but the agreements with the companies are such that that data isn't retained or used for training. It has sort of suitable encryption protocols end to end. And so and most institutions are sufficiently comfortable with that paradigm that they're willing to set that up. And a lot of the time, like the simplest way to have your own internal large language model that's in concept at least safe for your data, is to just license Microsoft Copilot. So it's more expensive than a lot of the other options are, but it's very easy and turnkey, especially because basically all FIs are Microsoft shops. So they're already trusting Microsoft with their data. And so using Copilot or using Azure OpenAI Cloud, which is the other common way to do it that takes a little bit more front-end effort, but is a lot more cost efficient, is already within their risk tolerance.
Thank you.
Of course. All right. If there's no other questions, then I think we can wrap up. And if there's any question that occurs to you later that you forgot, feel free to reach out to Larry or myself. Feel free to just shoot us an email or connect with us on LinkedIn, and we'll be happy to chat.
Well done, Connor. Thank you.
Thank you.